Hello, everybody. This is Parrish Alford with the Daily Journal, joined by Logan Lowry, our Mississippi State beat writer. Big wave from Logan. We're wrapping up day one of SEC Media Days from the Daily Journal Hoover World Headquarters here at the Hampton Inn. I just want to talk a little bit about what we learned today, Logan. We heard from SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey with the State of the SEC address that we hear from the commissioner every year at this time. We heard from Florida coach Jim McElwain, got him out of order here. Jim McElwain, Auburn's Gus Malzahn, and Vanderbilt's Derek Mason. Those were the coaches and those were the schools with student athletes here today. Tomorrow's a big day for our coverage area. Mississippi State coach Dan Mullen will take to the ballroom tomorrow. Mississippi State players with him as well. Then it'll be 2 days before Hugh Freeze speaks here, that being the last day of Media Days. But let's talk about Greg Sankey first. Logan, what stood out to you?
He was very, eloquent in his speech. It was very planned out. He had a PowerPoint presentation that coincided with everything that he was saying, and I really enjoyed listening to him speak. Now, it felt a lot like a college lecture, a little bit. You know, you're kind of just sitting there, and he's up on the stage, and he's talking, and it went a little long, and my attention span started to drift towards the end. But, yeah, I really like some of the things that he has in store. He seems like he's really engaging to the student athletes themselves. He talked about bringing in I think 2 representatives from every school over the past couple of weeks and talking to those students, and just about their experiences. And it was more off the field.
Yeah, had groups of student athletes here in Birmingham, I guess, and talking to them about their experiences.
Right, and just trying to improve their off-the-field life to where maybe they have more of a social life or more time to study or anything like that. So, it was kind of neat to experience something like that. He seemed like he really enjoyed that interaction with the student athletes, getting feedback from them and maybe how they can improve their lives off the field in the future.
Well, I tell you what stood out for me was I immediately honed in on what he had to say about the NCAA investigation at Ole Miss, and of course he didn't state it that way. There are 2 investigations going on in the conference right now, Ole Miss and Missouri basketball. And Sankey just referenced the 2 schools under investigation, didn't name those schools, but spoke, I thought, with great conviction about how he believes the SEC schools can continue to compete at a high level, at a championship level, and stay within the rules as well. He went on to say, look, this can't happen again, and I'm paraphrasing here. We can't continue to have these missteps, want to support these schools and help them through it, but this can't keep going on. That was kind of the message that we heard from Greg Sankey relative to the ongoing NCAA investigations at Ole Miss, which obviously is more prevalent on the minds of our audience, but also at Missouri. Now, one thing he did say, he talked about the SEC committee chaired by Georgia President Jerry Moorhead that is kind of there to, from what I took from that, Logan, help schools just talk this out. I mean, I didn't really hear a mission statement on that committee, but basically it's their committee of all schools. They're talking about how they can continue to compete and stay inside the boundaries of NCAA compliance. So, the SEC taking an active role in helping its members do the right thing. The other side of that, Logan, is this is college football. Sometimes it's not about the schools. Sometimes it's about third parties. We see some of that in the Ole Miss case. But, there's such a thing as institutional control. And I think the modern day lingo for that the NCAA put in place in 2013 is, quote, head coach responsibility. But it sounds a lot like what the NCAA charged Billy Brewer with back in the day. And I'll just call it institutional control. But there is that in play, and the NCAA guidelines right now, they hold head coaches responsible, and you can talk that out with an SEC committee or not. At the end of the day, you're going to have more fingers in the pie in football. You're going to have boosters who believe they're a part, believe they're doing the right thing. Maybe they don't believe they're doing the right thing. Maybe they believe they're doing what's best anyway. And that's what schools have to be on guard against.
Yeah, and another thing, when Sankey started to take questions towards the end, he was asked about SEC's, I guess, their policy on transfers regarding domestic violence, and how if you're kicked out of one school, you can't transfer to another SEC school if that's what you were kicked out for a domestic violence charge. Obviously, a different circumstance outside of those guidelines happened with Mississippi State this year, with Jeffrey Simmons obviously being involved in that fight with a female, and he's an incoming freshman, and that's something that rule does not apply to as an incoming freshman. And he was asked, what his opinion of that was. And Sankey actually said something, he actually coincided with Mississippi State Athletic Director Scott Strickland, was he doesn't think that 10 seconds of video, he shouldn't judge someone's character based off of 10 seconds of video. And I thought that was really surprising to hear him, repeat the sentiments that Scott Strickland had to say. So Dan Mullen's going to have a chance to address that for the first time tomorrow. It's something he hasn't talked about I think he talked to ESPN's Chris Lowe about it, and I think that's been the only person that's actually talked to him about it since the ruling came down that they chose to admit him into school. So I'm sure he's going to get bombarded with questions like that. Scott Strickland was kind of left on an island at SEC meetings down in Destin to field those questions from the national media and all media in general, and Dan Mullen's probably going to have to face the music tomorrow.
All right, you had the Gus Malzahn story today. Talk to us about Auburn.
Well, I think last year Auburn was kind of the media darling. That's the sexy pick. For at SEC Media Days a year ago, Auburn was picked to win the SEC outright a year ago. It was kind of weird because Auburn was picked to win the league outright, but Alabama was picked to win the SEC West last year. It was
strange.
really weird. Now those
only thing you knew for sure is you were in the state of Alabama,
right? And all that stuff will come out later in the week, and we'll talk about that when it's released. But as far as last year goes, that was the pick. Auburn's going to win the league outright, and Jeremy Johnson. There was all this hype about Jeremy Johnson, Auburn quarterback, the next Cam Newton. He's coming in, he's going to take Auburn to the promised land, and they had Duke Williams. He was an amazing wide receiver coming into that season as well. Neither one of those guys panned out for him. Jeremy Johnson, the first 3 games that he started, I think he threw 437 yards, if I remember our article correctly. 437 yards and 5 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. I think that's correct. I know the 5 interceptions, 5 touchdowns, 6 interceptions is correct. The yardage is pretty much
less than stellar.
Right, exactly. Not exactly what you're looking for a quarterback that was praised and had all those high expectations. And Duke Williams started the first 5 games for Auburn and then was dismissed from the team. So, Auburn was predicted to win the SEC outright, and they finished 7th in the SEC West. It was the worst ever prediction by us in the media. I guess we have to take the fall for this. Even though I didn't jump on the Auburn train last year like a lot of people apparently did, but it was they finished last in the West. They were 2-6 I think in the league last year, and something that Gus Malzahn touched on was he obviously addressed where their shortcomings from a year ago, but the main one that he talked about was how many close games they lost last year. And 4 of those 6 losses, all 6 losses came in conference play last year. 4 of those 6 losses were by 8 points or less. 2 of those were the teams that we covered, Mississippi State and Ole Miss. Were in the mix of 4 losses. But he just talked about how narrow the margin of error is in this league. It's just you have to win those close games. And he talked about during Auburn's heyday, when he was the offensive coordinator and his first year as the head coach, about how successful they were at winning those close games. I mean, you talk about the miracle at Jordan Hare and just all those crazy plays that happened, in their run to the national championship. It was close, there was close games, and they won all those games. And you have to have a little bit of luck to win a national championship in this league. And I think any coach that's won a national championship would tell you that. So, but that's kind of the thing that I got from Auburn today, is that they were going to put last year in the past, learn from it, and try to, I guess, because they have 3 quarterbacks. Johnson is back this year. They have Sean White, who started 5 games for them last year as a redshirt freshman. And then they have a JUCO transfer in John Franklin III, who's actually out of East Mississippi Community College.
And haven't you already heard, now the hype isn't quite as much as it was last year, but even now you're hearing these John Franklin comparisons to Nick Marshall, and there's some of that, and I'm sure the guy has some athleticism. But if any school has learned about overhyping players this time of year, it seems like Auburn would have learned that lesson. But you know what? There are those comparisons out there, and we've seen junior college quarterbacks come on and be successful. Ole Miss is a big example of that. So we'll see what he can do.
Right, and he talked about they haven't named a starter yet, but he talked about molding their offense to fit the style of the quarterback whenever they do name the starter. They're going to try to, I guess, tweak the offense. I think that's the word he actually used, was tweak the offense to fit the style of and the strengths of the quarterback that they, I guess, picked to be the starter. Now, a year ago they had to go back to Johnson. Midway through the season, Sean White got hurt, and they just kind of in and out, a revolving door at the quarterback position for Auburn. So.
Now, Gus Malzahn also had some interesting things to say about the Ole Miss defensive line. He was asked about that line without Robert Kimdichie. Kimdichie, one of 3 first-round NFL draft picks the Rebels are replacing this year. And Malzahn basically, still said, hey, that's a stout group. That was a good group with Robert Kimdichie, and he expects it to be one of the better defensive lines that he will face this year. Ole Miss has continued to recruit well at that position, and they do have a nice mix right now of some experience coming back at the ends and some talent, though unproven talent to some degree, at the tackles. But high praise there from Gus Malzahn, the Auburn coach, for the Ole Miss defensive line. All right, let's talk Florida a little bit, and again, you had the McElwain story.
I did, and it was just basically talking about them building on the success that they had in year 1 under him. He comes in from Colorado State. Obviously, he's very familiar with the SEC, having been the offensive coordinator at Alabama for a few years. He goes out to Colorado State for 3 years, had successful out there. Comes in at Florida. In year 1, he takes Florida to the SEC championship game, wins the SEC East. They go in there. It had only lost 1 game at that point all season. I think they'd lost to LSU in the season. And talk about the experience of those players who kind of overachieved, in year 1. And he just talked about how proud he was of those guys for doing what they accomplished last year. But he was disappointed in the way they finished. They lost their last 3 ball games pretty badly to end the year. They only scored just a handful of points in those 3 games and were blown out pretty bad. So he was just he said he didn't take that lightly. Yeah, I think that's kind of just been eating on him throughout this offseason, just the way they finished the year. And he talked about trying to get back to the form that they showed last year and finish the season. It's something they didn't do a year ago. So I think Florida's going to have a lot of talent. I do know that Tennessee is going to should be a lot better. I guess we shouldn't be talking about what they're going to do, especially with what happened with Auburn a year ago. But Tennessee should be a lot better, and that should be a more competitive SEC East than probably what we saw a year ago.
The other thing that we heard from Jim McElwain today was a lot of quotability, if you will. It almost looked like he was entering the race to replace Steve Spurrier as best quote at SEC Media Days. A lot of wit, some one-liners in there. Took a little jab at Florida State, which I'm presenting this as fact. I haven't checked it out, but there were Florida writers who were talking about Florida State having given its players rings, championship rings, so to speak, for winning the games against Florida and Miami last year. So state champs, Florida State there, they got rings for that. I haven't checked that out. Could be. But Jim McElwain was asked about that and basically said, well, they won the games, and not sure we could do that at Florida. Don't know if that's in the budget. But one-liners there from Jim McElwain, really kind of the quotable coach of day one. Vanderbilt, Derek Mason, Logan, I had the note. We can't call it a story. It's Vanderbilt. I had the Vanderbilt note today. And, of course, that's a permanent opponent for Ole Miss. That was a game last year that Ole Miss was coming off that big win against Alabama. They had beaten Vanderbilt 41-3 the year before in Nashville. Maybe they overlooked them a little bit, but that was that stretch of 5-2 without Tunsil. Had the big win in Tuscaloosa, but they never really controlled the Vanderbilt game and didn't really put it away until less than 5 minutes to play in the game. Had the lead most of the time, but didn't really control that game. Derek Mason says that his team is better, says that it learned how to compete last year, and this year he believes they'll learn how to win. Now, that first Vanderbilt team was atrocious. You remember, you saw
Oh, yeah,
them in Starkville that year, or was it last year? They got rolled over in Starkville.
It was 2000. It was the year before.
Yeah,
it was 51 to nothing.
Yeah,
I believe
so two years ago in Starkville, just annihilated, and also annihilated at home or on the Titans field there. It was the Titan Stadium for that Ole Miss game, but just a very bad team. So they were better last year. They won 2 conference games last year. That's twice as many as they won in Derek Mason's first season. So we will see where Vanderbilt goes from here. One of the reasons they were a lot better last year, Logan, was defense. Mason came over as defensive coordinator from Stanford, very successful there. He did not run his own defense in 2014. He did in 2015, and the Commodores showed great improvement on that side of the ball. He talked about being a head coach who knows his strengths, knows that defense is his, quote, wheelhouse, and that's where they made improvement. So we'll see if Vanderbilt can continue to improve in that regard tomorrow. So Mississippi State coming up tomorrow. Vanderbilt improved this season. I don't know how much improvement they're going to get done tomorrow, but Mississippi State is coming up tomorrow. And who are the players? Who are the players coming tomorrow?
Richie Brown, A.J. Jefferson, and Fred Ross will be representing the Bulldogs tomorrow. I'm kind of interested. It's kind of unique to see them bring 2 defensive players and then the wide receiver and Fred Ross too. So going to be interested to see because there are a lot of defensive questions to ask. Mississippi State's defensive players. Obviously with 4 new coaches on that side of the ball, probably going to be implementing more of a 3-4 base look, and we'll have to see how much the players talk about it. Since I can't get any coaches to really comment on it, we'll see if I can
It's
get
the mystery defense.
I can
kind of like the Scooby-Doo van.
Maybe I can nudge something out of the players. I think A.J. Jefferson might be my best bet. I think Richie's probably going to be pretty scripted. He's going to play by the book, but maybe I can get A.J. to kind of get off the rails a little bit.
Folks, that's it for Logan Lowry and myself, Parrish Alford, wrapping up day 1 at SEC Media Days.